To our webinar, 6 Secrets to Helping Your Child Conquer the SAT and ACT. This is presented by Testive, and my name is Miro Kazakoff. I'm actually the co-founder of Testive. I'm also a member of the faculty at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. And we're going to spend most of today talking about how to help your child prepare for the SAT and ACT. Oftentimes this is parents watching this. We found it can be really useful if parents and students watch this webinar together. So if your student is available, or if your student and your parents available, a great chance to call them in. I think you'll find that there's a lot to discuss in here. I'm going to talk a little bit about Testive at the beginning and ending of the webinar, but I'm mostly going to focus on strategies that anyone can use really in any context to do better on the SAT, ACT, and far beyond that. To give you a little bit of history, I co-founded Testive with Tom Rose. We had both been private test prep tutors for many years. And the things that we loved about being test prep tutors were we loved working with students. We loved the chance to see really measurable results, that students who worked hard had a chance to see the results of that hard work over many months pay off in a clearly measurable gain for something that was important in their life. And actually, the other thing we liked is the money. We were paid very well, upwards of $200 an hour. The things that we didn't like very much were that we saw ourselves repeating the same things over and over again with many students. And we saw that an opportunity for technology to help. We also saw that students were just busy in a way that was unimaginable to me even 10 or 15 years ago. And that really a new approach to prep was required that dealt with the fact that students were exceptionally time constrained. And finally, the other thing that we didn't like was that while we loved our students, in order to make it financially worthwhile for us, the prices that we charged meant that we could only afford to work with really just some of the wealthiest students available. And so we created Testive to address all of those things, to give us a chance to work with more students in a way that actually fit in with students' lives and their schedules, and took advantage of technology in a real way. And so the principles that Testive is built on are all about achieving mastery, and not just mastery on a college test or an admissions exam, but really the principles of mastery in general in life. And this is why I find the work that we do so satisfying, is that the skills that we teach students are skills that go beyond these tests, though they will help them excel tremendously on these exams. And the results of working with Testive or using this methodology are 4 times the industry average. But these are really tools that anyone can use in almost any situation. And today in this webinar, I'm going to give away all of the secrets, everything that we do. You don't have to use Testive to engage in those secrets, but we'll talk a little bit at the very end about why you might be interested in doing that. We have a picture of LeBron James here, and this is a really good example of some of the principles that Testive is built on related to mastery, which is that LeBron was obviously born with an unbelievable set of talents, but those talents would be meaningless and ineffective and certainly not lead him to anywhere near even a basketball career if he didn't have the discipline to reinforce and practice the behaviors that made him great. What makes LeBron great is not about what he was born with. It's about the practice and the discipline that he put in to get and achieve greatness. And that speaks a lot to what our general learning philosophy is here at Testive. This is the first of many graphs that I will show you tonight. On the x-axis here, we have effort. Think of that roughly as the time and energy that you put in. And on the y vertical axis, we have score improvement. Think of that as, well, the score improvement. And I'll pull out this arrow here. So for most people, there's some relationship between effort and score improvement. The more effort you put in, the more time you work, your score is going to increase at a certain rate. At Testive, what we have is a set of technology that helps change the slope of that line. That means that for every amount of effort that you put in, you're going to get more out of it. And we give that technology away for free. You can go to testive.com and you can use all of the same technology that we use with our paid students. You can use that completely for free and achieve the same results. The difference, and what really holds most students back, is the human motivation factor. That to improve, you have to put in effort. There's simply no way around that. And that's why we offer Testive's coaching products. And that is how we make our living. And those are the products they'll talk about very much at the end, where we provide coaching support for students to help make sure that they move down this effort curve as efficiently as possible and get the maximum score improvements and reach their maximum potential. I'm going to talk very generally through the course of this webinar. And of course, every student is different. So if you have any questions, and I pretty much assume that most people will, you can always visit us and book some time with one of our student success advisors at parentconsult.testive.com. It's the explicit job of our student success advisors to help put students in the right preparation program for them and to answer the questions that's going to put them in the right place. If that's Testive, great. If that's not, and for many students it isn't, they'll tell you that too. But they'll be able to provide a lot more specific detail than I can in this general way. So let's dive into our first secret for conquering the SAT or the ACT. And the first secret to being able to conquer these exams is to know that it matters. And the reason that we take these exams is not for their own sake, but it's for really expanding students' college admissions options. And so let's look a little bit about the college application process and what's important to know. Well, the most important part of your college admissions package is going to be your grades. That's followed by your test scores, your SAT or ACT scores. And together, those two form the objective part of your college admissions package. This is the part that really is comparable across students, doesn't really change that much school to school, and isn't subject at all to the sort of whims and attitudes of the individual person reading your application. And those are the two most important parts of your application. That's followed, and there's a pretty big gap here, by the extracurricular activities that you engage in. That could be leadership and activities at school, that could be employment, that could be, whatever it is that you're doing outside of your study hours. And then finally, by the personal essays that you're going to write, mostly during your senior year. These are the essays that are going to really talk about who you are as an individual. And together, those form the subjective part of your college admissions package, the part that really is different school to school and how important it is, and is somewhat subject to the whims of whomever is reading it. So you really want to maximize the objective part of your college admissions package. And though we've said grades are most important, I want to talk a little bit about the relationship between grades and test scores. And for that, I have, this chart's a bit of an eyesore, so we're going to walk through it just piece by piece here, bear with me. So this is a chart of students who applied to Boston University. On the vertical y-axis, we have the GPA of the students who applied. On the horizontal x-axis, we have the ACT and equivalent SAT score of those students. And every dot here represents one student. The red dots are students who were denied admission to BU, and the green dots are students who were accepted. There's a couple of patterns that I want you to note here. The first is, as we look here, right around kind of, let's say 1750, you can see that to the left of 1750, there are virtually no green dots. It's almost entirely red. And I'll note that on these charts, it's really easy to look at individual dots and try and figure out the story for them. Really look at these sort of charts as a whole and the general trends that they're giving. That's going to be much more instructive. And you'll see that below 1750, virtually no green dots. And so we can see that BU really has a floor for a minimum acceptable test score that they're going to allow in for their students. If you're not hitting that minimum, it's going to be very hard for you to achieve admission to BU, even with students who are getting very high GPAs in the 3.5 to 4.0 range. These are unweighted GPAs here. So you see, this is one of the first things that we learn about test prep, which is that your test scores may not get you into a school, but they can certainly keep you out of a school if you aren't having scores that are high enough for the schools that have, some of them, a very clear cutoff. The other trend that I want to note here is that right around, probably about 2000, it switches from a mix of green and red dots to being primarily green dots above the 2000 mark. And this brings us to our second understanding of how test scores impact your college admissions. And the way that we roughly think about this is that Your test scores are either a check in the plus column of all, there's a scale of all the things they're weighing about you as a candidate. And good test scores can either be a check in the plus column for your admissions package, or they can be a check in the minus column that's going to have to be overcome by other factors in your admissions package. So the general way to think about this is very, very roughly, we say, look at the mean of the test score, the range of test scores for the school that you're applying to, and look at what the median test score for that school is. If your GPA is above the middle test score, then very roughly it's helping your college admissions package to that school. If it's below that median, then it's really dragging down your application. And you're going to need to be looking at other ways to try and boost your application to that school. And if it's too low, you're really not going to be a credible candidate for admission to that school. Let me just add in some notes here. This is from before on college application criteria. And let's look at another one of these charts. This is the same chart for NYU. And again, just to remember, it's GPA on the vertical y-axis here of students applying, SAT, ACT score on the horizontal x-axis. Red dots are students who are denied, and green dots are students who are admitted. We see similar but some slight differences in the pattern. Here you see that it's actually a little bit of a, very roughly a diagonal line, kind of separating the green-red dot mix from the primarily red dot. So we can see in this that NYU is a school where, well, if your test scores are a little lower, then they might be willing to accept you if you have a very high GPA. But that there really is a range of score below which you're just not likely to get acceptance to NYU. And again, we see the same change over here, which is that about 2000, we move from a mix of green and red dots to primarily green dots. So again, for students whose scores are above that median, their odds of admission really go up dramatically. And you'll see that most of those students also have pretty high GPAs. So again, those two rules that we talked about really reinforced in two schools. And a question we often get asked is, what is a good SAT score? And the answer really depends on, well, what schools are you applying to? A good SAT score or ACT score changes from school to school. And so you really need to understand for the schools you're looking at, what are the test scores of the students that they accept? And how do you fit along those lines? I will say, just as a quick note, that this applies to virtually all of the schools in the country, with a small exception of some of the most hyper-competitive schools. At the hyper-competitive schools, there is virtually no way to guarantee admission to them. The level of competition among the Harvards, the MITs, Yales, Stanfords, Princetons of the world is so dramatic that actually students really just look to need to be great on every dimension. But that is not true of most schools. And most schools, there's a clear range, and you can really have a sense of whether or not you're a credible candidate by doing just a little bit of research on that school and the GPA and test scores that tend to lead to their acceptance. So we've said that grades are the most important part of your application. And if that's true, well, why do people focus on SAT and ACT scores? And the answer is that's because these scores are the only part of your application that you can move in a short period of time. And by short, I don't mean hours and days. I mean weeks and months. But if you look at something like GPA, well, by the time you get to your junior year, you really only have, at most, 3 semesters of GPA left to change your overall school GPA, 2 from your junior year and the first half of your senior year. So most of your GPA is fixed by the time you get to junior year. It's very hard to move. It's created over 4 years. And that's why you're really going to want to see and focus on your test scores in a short period of time, but really allocate time to moving because they're the most important part of your admissions package that you can move in the period of months. And that brings us to our second secret, which is to know when to prep. And the answer to this question is another question, which is, when do you have 100 hours free? And if you were like, literally, I believe everyone I've ever met, you'll say the answer is, I don't. And that's one of the challenges of this. So just to talk a little bit about 100 hours. We have seen that it takes about 100 hours for a student to reach his or her full potential score. That doesn't mean you have to spend 100 hours, and this is very, very rough student to student. Some students it may be much less, some students it may be somewhat more. And not all those hours are equal. The first or second hour, or even the 10th or 20th hour may be more valuable than the 50th or 60th hour. But then after 100, you've really hit the point of diminishing returns, and there's not much more you can do. The point here that I want to make is that this is something that you're really going to have to commit to setting aside a substantial period of time to if you want to improve. There are things that you can do to improve quickly and efficiently, but there is no magic here. The other thing that you want to think about is having that 100 hours culminate in a test day. And the SAT is given 7 times a year, and the ACT is administered 6 times a year. This is in the US for US students. And so you really want to plan your 100-hour study period to culminate in a test day. We'll talk a little bit about sort of when to prep that thinks about how to end in this kind of time frame. And the general model for thinking about preparation is that it's like climbing a mountain. So if you were to imagine climbing Mount Everest, while the actual climb you do might happen over a short period of time, several days and weeks, the preparation for climbing Mount Everest is a multi-year process. And so if you were to think about saying, I want to climb it, you'd really say, well, I want to climb it in 2 or 3 years. What should I be doing now? And for the sophomores out there, what you really should be doing is not worrying about these tests. You should be focused on building that really solid GPA that's going to help you get into school. And also because much of the material that's tested is being taught during this time. And so you want to focus on being good at your schoolwork, learning the material being tested, and really being able to drive a great GPA there. Now, as we get into the summer before junior year, this is what we found is the ideal time to prepare and getting started. This is a little earlier than you might have heard from other people in your life, your guidance counselors and such. And I will be totally honest with you, we don't recommend this for any sort of pedagogical or dramatic teaching reasons. This is simply a schedule constraint, which is that we have found that it is the summer before junior year is basically the last period of substantial free time before your applications are due. Junior year becomes very, very busy for students. And so allocating a chunk of time during the summer before junior year is a time where students can really focus on their prep. Lighten up a little bit as they get into the school year, take the first administration of the year, see how they do, and then have plenty of time during junior year to schedule their second or maybe even third test. Almost all students are going to take the test twice. A couple will take it 3 times. And we've generally seen that it's hard beyond 3 times to improve your score. So getting a score in early in junior year relieves a lot of student stress, helps you know where you stand, and takes advantage of that last free period before things get really busy in high school. Certainly during junior year, that's prime time. That's when you're going to be taking these exams. Everyone is going to end up doing some degree of prep during their junior year. And then that summer before senior year, well, that's really kind of your last chance period. That's, your last chance to get in some degree of prep for a final boost if you're not happy with your scores, to get in one of those early test days in the summer of your senior year. But really, again, our strong recommendation is if you're able to, the summer before junior year. And if you are a junior right now, well, now is the time to get started. And now we come to our third secret. And this is the meat of the presentation, which is that the dirty secret of the industry is that there's actually only one method of effective test preparation. And essentially every class, every tutor is doing some variation on this method. And I'm going to go ahead and share it with you here today. It's a methodology that you actually can do completely on your own. You don't need the help of anyone. We'll talk about why that help can be valuable. But this is something that you can do. And essentially any prep you're going to do is going to revolve to some degree around this approach. So here's how everyone prepares effectively. Step 1, you need to get a baseline score. you need to know where you're starting from. And what you want to start with is a test experience that is as close to the real test as possible. So PSAT can be a guideline, but the PSAT, just isn't as long as the actual SAT and ACT are. So what you're going to want to do is go out and buy one of these two books, affectionately called the Blue Book and the Red Book for obvious reasons by those of us in the industry. And these are the only two sources of previously published real SAT and ACT tests. Or I should say, these are the only two legal sources of previously published real SAT and ACT tests. And getting one of these will give you, and taking one of these tests, a very good sense of what the SAT and ACT experience is like. You want to take these tests under as close to testing conditions as you can. So that means taking them entirely in one sitting, adhering very strictly to the test timing, giving yourself only the allotted breaks allowed. And if you really, so doing that will be great. You can do that anywhere you want. If you really want to go to the next level and truly detailedly simulate test conditions, I don't think this is necessary, but I do let people know. You're going to want to get up at 7 a.m. on a Saturday morning and actually take these tests at the same time you would. In the public library is actually a great simulation of what a testing room is like. While theoretically libraries are quiet and testing rooms are quiet, the real truth is there's actually quite a bit of commotion in testing rooms. You can hear people moving around. So actually taking these in a semi-public space where people are largely quiet, it's a pretty good facsimile of what it's like to be in a testing room. So that's for the truly committed out there that want the 100% real experience. The next thing you need to do is grade those tests and figure out where you're weak. Because in order to be efficient about your testing time, you need to know where to focus. Here we have an example of some SAT scores. If you grade the test on your own, you'll get these 3 high-level scores: math, reading, and writing. These are for the current SAT. The SAT is going to be changing in the spring of 2016, but this is for the current SAT test. And this is actually a score report from testive.com. So you can actually go to testive.com and upload your scores from the blue or the red book and get this more detailed breakdown. And as the new tests are released, we'll also have that grader available on testive.com as well. Again, we're talking a lot here generally. If you do have any questions or want to talk more specifically about your student or deeper questions about the test that I'm not addressing, you can book some time with one of our advisors at parentconsult.testive.com. So let's dive into this individual student here. So from the highest level, we know that the student got a 490 on math. Putting it into our grader, or again, if you work with some sort of professional, most of them have some sort of breakdown that they do. What this shows here is that in geometry, had the entire test been geometry, this student would have received a 270 on the math section. And this is a real student. And this was tremendously great information for this student. That meant by focusing on geometry, she was able to make a really significant gain in her scores by just clearly focusing on one area. And so she was able to see a really significant improvement there. You see another example of this down in writing, where she's getting a 650 overall. But parallelism comparisons are much lower at 530 than her overall score. And this is pretty typical from what I've seen, which is that most students have 1 or 2 areas of disproportionate deficiency compared to the rest. Perhaps it was a teacher they didn't get along with that year, or a topic that was covered when they were having a fight with a friend or breaking up with a significant other. One of the challenges of high school is that the information comes at you relentlessly, no matter what's going on in your personal life. And one of the things I actually appreciate about these exams is that they're a time to go back and shore up your abilities on some skills that you might have missed that are actually important and valuable math skills, for instance, to have in life. So by identifying your areas of weakness, you can really identify where you want to focus your practice time to be most effective and raise your score the fastest. And what you want to do is practice in those areas. And if you go to testive.com, you'll see this is how we have our practice grouped, is by questions in those areas. And so that'll allow you to focus your practice. And as you practice and bring one skill set up, higher than it was before, well, a new skill set's going to be your weakest, and you'll want to shift your practice to that area. And there's a very specific way that you want to do this practice in order to maximize score gains. You want to do a set of questions, and after you're done, write immediately when you're done. You want to review every question that you either got wrong or that you weren't highly confident about your answer. And you want to ask yourself two very specific questions about that question that you got wrong or guessed on. The first is that you want to figure out why you got the question wrong and learn if there's any underlying concepts or rules associated with it. Grammar rules, reading rules, math rules. The real rules that are going to help you know how to get the right answer and make sure that you're doing the process correctly. Second question you want to ask yourself, and this can be the tougher one, is what can you do to get a similar question right in the future? And while the underlying concepts, students are going to have really the same answers to that, the what do you individually and specifically need to do to get a similar question right in the future? Well, that really differs student to student. And these are really hard to come up with because you want to come up with things that are concrete and actionable triggers to make sure that you're going to get a question right in the future. So an example, a bad example of one of these would be, oh, I need to stop making careless mistakes, because that's not concrete. A good example of one of these might be, what I need to do is write down every step of a mathematical problem, because that's a concrete mechanical way that's going to prevent you from making careless errors. And you do actually want to write those down. Now, all you got to do is repeat for up to 100 hours in small increments, slowly building up the length of the time that you study for as you culminate approaching test day. Well, as you can see, it's not complicated, but it's not easy either. Doing this process is actually really hard. It takes a lot of discipline. And that leads us to our fourth secret, which is that as a student, you want to spend more time reflecting than doing questions. This is probably the biggest tactical mistake that I see students making, is that they spend plenty of time doing questions and very little time reflecting on those wrong answers. Because it's this reflection time that's where the learning really happens. And the rough rule of thumb that you're going to want is that you'll want to spend about 1/3 of your time doing practice questions and 2/3 of your time doing the review of those wrong answers. That's where the bulk of your time should be spent. So in order to do this, you really need to be thinking deeply about what do you need to do differently to get a question right in the future. And you also need to be doing questions that are difficult enough that you'll have multiple wrong answers that you'll have time to review. And so that's why, again, if you use Testive.com, our system is actually fully adaptive. So as you're practicing on Testive, the questions that you're getting are actually adjusting in difficulty level to be right at the edge of your difficulty level, so that you'll be getting enough questions wrong that you can do that hard work of reviewing on them and actually extracting the learnings that are going to make you better. Here's an example of what that looks like at Testive. And this is the most important screen on Testive.com. This is the screen that we give to students after they get a question wrong, where you have to reflect on your wrong answers. And I'll just call out here, I don't know how easy it is to read what this particular student wrote here, because we asked students to write them down. And it's very important that you write them down. Again, you can do this in a notebook, or again, you can use our online software for this. So what this student wrote is, remember that 1 is not a prime number. Well, that's a great example of just a factual piece of information that a student needs in order to be able to get a similar question like this right in the future. So great, clear piece of sort of information. The second thing, well, that's a much more personal activity that the student needs to do in order to get a similar question right in the future, which is, the student wrote, don't be afraid to write out an entire set of numbers. So I happen to know this student, and the context here is there's some questions on the SAT and ACT that ask you to work with sets of numbers. And sometimes those sets are, not super large, maybe 10 or 15 numbers. And while there is a mathematical or algebraic way to figure out what the right answer is, sometimes it just makes more sense to write out the entire set of numbers and start crossing things out. And for this student, that's the approach that he found was more effective to getting him the better score. So a great example of a tactical change to make to be more likely to get these questions right in the future. And this process of really thinking about why something isn't working for you, reflecting on it, coming up with concrete actions that you want to change. Well, that's a skill that will really drive you to great results and improvement on these tests and in many, many difficult problems in life. What you want to do every time you go in and do your next practice set is you want to go back and review all of the notes that you wrote previously so that they're fresh in your mind right before your next practice set. And that's how you're going to begin to internalize these lessons and actually start to change behavior. Because getting better is about changing behavior. And changing your own behavior is really tough. You can find that on Testive here underneath the review tab is where it'll list all of those notes that you've written. And so that brings us to our fifth secret. And this is a tough one for parents. But that's that parents are usually better cheerleaders than taskmasters. My experience is that reflecting on why you're doing something wrong, really marinating in your wrong answers, the things that you don't know, is a really emotionally challenging process. And it requires somebody to be an accountability partner for the student. It requires basically all of us to have someone who's pushing us and holding us accountable for it. This is why we have financial advisors. This is why we have personal trainers. It's not because those people, though they might be and are often aren't great at what they do, it's to hold you accountable for doing the work necessary. And that we've found that it's nearly impossible for parents to play that role. I'm blessed to still have my parents with me in my life, and I do not like admitting what I'm doing wrong to them at all, at any time. And I'm well past my teenage years. So it's really important to find somebody else to be the student's accountability partner. And that doesn't have to be someone that you pay. It could often be a trusted older sibling, a family friend, a cousin. But this is a big reason why people hire other people to help them out. And indeed, this is how we make our money at Testive, is by providing our coaching services. And our coaches are both content experts who have all gotten 99th percentile scores on the test, but are really there to do the hard work of being the accountability partner of the student and to make sure that they're doing the work that's going to lead them to success and that they're doing it in a way that's going to lead them to success as quickly as possible. And indeed, as I said, while they're all 99th percentile scores, the things that I really hire for when we're looking for our coaches is that they genuinely enjoy working with this age group. We want students who are happy, and we want coaches who are happy, because they're the kind of people who find it satisfying to work with students and to help get them better. And part of the work that we do is helping make sure to match your student up with a coach where there is going to be that emotional connection, because that's really the big driver of success. And then we come to our sixth, final, and most important secret, which is that there really is only one secret. You have to do the work. Anyone out there promising magical tips and tricks to get better is simply not true. There are tips, there are tricks. We teach them, everybody teaches them. The work of getting better is about doing and repeating and practicing those tips and tricks, about knowing the underlying material so that you can reliably deploy those skills on test day. And to do that, you have to do the work of practice. There's just no way around it. Here's how we do that at Testive. I talked a little bit about our coaches. So if you do sign up for our coaching problem, our coaches meet with our students once a week via video chat. Because our students do all of their work online at Testive, we have an unbelievable amount of information already available to the coach. So when I was a private tutor, I often needed to spend the first half hour or even hour of my session simply understanding what was going on with our students. Because our coaches have all of that data available to them from the Testive interface, they can dive right in and just hit right on where a student, where their weakest area is, what their biggest issue is, and what's blocking them from getting better. So our coaches can be really efficient with their students' time, and our students can stay focused on actually getting the work done. The other big advantage that we have is that we get to monitor every student every day. Because students are doing their work online, we can actually see which students are doing their work and which aren't. And when I was a tutor, probably the biggest failure of students, and I felt myself often, was that a week would go by, and if a student hadn't done the work, there was simply no way for our session to be valuable. What we do at Testive is we actually have students put together a study calendar that they actually set up online of when they're going to study. And the coaches work with them to make sure that they're hitting that calendar. And if a student does their work, they're going to get a message from the coach that or the next day saying, good job, you've done your work, like, nice work. Or if you've hit all of your committed to study days, that we'll be there to celebrate that, which is a really big achievement, which is making a plan and sticking to it. And if a student needs to change that plan, that's part of life. And the coaches will be there to help them change that plan and make sure that it's realistic and that it can be done and that it fits honestly within a student's life. Because it is hard to find the time to do this work. And our coaches are trained to have real, honest conversations with our students about how to make this a priority in their life and what needs to happen. And so with that accountability, we found that our students get better faster because our technology focuses them on the right things and our students do the work. Parents, of course, are an important part of that process. And we send you an email every week with an update on your students' progress, as well as give you access to a dashboard to track what's going on. And people enjoy it. 73% of parents tell us that they would refer their friends to try Testive. And that's why we've achieved, well, something that's one of the dirty secrets of the test prep industry. I think I mentioned a couple, but one of them is that for most students, it just doesn't work. And test prep doesn't work for most students because they don't do the work. So the industry average for score improvement is 30 points. At Testive, we publish, you can actually go to our website and see our score gains. Our average score increase is 4 times higher than the industry average. And this is not based on any magic. It's based on everything we've talked about here, which is that our technology focuses students on the right areas at the right difficulty levels so they get better faster, and that our coaches help make sure that students stick with it and do the work and do it in a way that's going to get them better. No magic, just good tech, good people, and hard work. So for those of you for whom it's appropriate, I certainly hope that you'll consider Testive's coaching package. Our private coaching can go for as little as $299 a month, depending on how many months you commit to. And for everyone, we have a money-back, risk-free 2-week trial. The student, the parent, or the coach can end the relationship for any reason if they feel like this isn't a place where the student's going to be successful. The next step, if you're interested, or if you have additional questions, is to book a free consultation at parentconsult.testive.com. For those of you who are interested in our services, I very, very much hope that you'll do that. For those of you who are going to pursue some other preparation route, I wish you the best of luck on that too. And I hope that this presentation has been a helpful guide to helping you think through what it takes to improve your scores and do the work that's going to help you expand your college options. So my best to everyone out there, as we say here at Testive,